It was close to midnight when I decided to head home. The city was quiet, the streets bathed in an eerie glow of flickering streetlights, and the occasional hum of a passing car. My old sedan had seen better days, but it was reliable, and tonight it was my only companion on the drive back. I took the back roads out of habit, a quieter, faster route through the suburbs that cut out all the stoplights. It was a journey I'd made 100 times before. Nothing unusual ever happened on those roads. Until that night. It started with a faint rhythmic noise, like the distant rumble of thunder. I glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting to see an oncoming car, but the road behind me was empty. The noise grew louder, almost like the sound of footsteps running, no pounding on the pavement. I shook it off as paranoia. The loneliness of night drives has a way of playing tricks on your mind. Then I saw it. Something darted across the road, just beyond the reach of my headlights. It was fast, too fast to be any animal I could think of. It was human-shaped, but wrong somehow. Its limbs bent at unnatural angles, and its movement was more like a spider skittering than anything human. I slammed on the brakes, heart racing, staring into the darkness where it disappeared. I sat there for a moment, gripping the wheel with white-knuckled intensity, waiting for something to happen. The world was deathly still. Not even the usual rustle of leaves in the wind. Just silence. I should have turned around, but curiosity, or maybe stupidity, got the better of me. I slowly eased off the brake, letting the car roll forward. My headlights illuminated the road ahead, and for a moment, it seemed normal, empty, peaceful. Then, a shadow flickered on the edge of my vision. It was on the side of the road, crouched low, its head cocked to one side like it was listening, watching. I floored the gas. The engine roared to life, and I sped down the road, refusing to look back. I told myself it was nothing, a trick of the light, a stray dog, anything to keep from acknowledging the rising panic clawing at my chest. But I could feel it, that oppressive sense of being watched, of something trailing just out of sight. The pounding noise returned, louder this time, closer, and then the lights in the car flickered. I cursed under my breath, slapping the dashboard like that would help. The flickering stopped, but the noise didn't. I glanced at the speedometer. 60, 70, 80 miles per hour. The noise was still there, keeping pace. I risked another glance in the rearview mirror. That's when I saw them. Eyes. Reflective and glinting, like animal eyes in the dark. But there were too many of them, spread out across the road and the trees on either side, moving closer, surrounding me. The lights flickered again, and the engine sputtered. My heart sank as the car slowed to a crawl, the headlights dimming until they were almost useless. I could barely see the road ahead, let alone what was chasing me. The pounding was deafening now, like a stampede of unseen horrors closing in. I yanked the steering wheel to the side, veering off the road and into a narrow gravel path I'd never noticed before. The car bounced and jostled, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away. The pounding sound faded, replaced by the crunch of gravel under the tires. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived, because then I saw the house. It loomed out of the darkness like something out of a nightmare. Old, decrepit, its windows shattered and its roof sagging in places. But the lights were on, a sickly yellow glow spilling out onto the overgrown yard. Against every instinct, I stopped the car, the engine idling as I stared at the building. That's when the car died. The engine cut out, and the lights went with it, plunging me into darkness. My phone had no signal, and the battery was at 2%. I was completely alone, or at least I thought I was, until I saw the figure standing in the doorway of the house. It was tall and thin, its silhouette outlined by the dim light from inside. It didn't move, didn't beckon, didn't speak. It just stood there, watching me. I locked the doors, as if that would help, and tried to start the car. The engine sputtered, but refused to catch. And then, the figure started walking. Slow, deliberate steps, like it had all the time in the world. I fumbled with my phone, using its feeble flashlight to scan the area around me. That's when I saw the other figures emerging from the woods. Dozens of them, their movements jerky and unnatural, like marionettes controlled by a clumsy puppeteer. They were closing in. The figure from the house reached the car first. It placed a hand on the hood, tilting its head as it stared at me through the windshield. Its face was obscured, but I could see its mouth, a too wide grin filled with teeth that were too sharp, too many. I don't know how I found the strength to move, but I did. I threw the door open, shoving the figure back, and bolted into the woods. Branches scratched at my face and arms as I ran, the sound of pursuit all around me. The laughter started then, high-pitched, echoing laughter that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I don't remember how long I ran. Minutes? Hours? It felt like an eternity before I stumbled out onto another road, nearly collapsing from exhaustion. A pair of headlights appeared in the distance, and I waved my arms frantically, praying the driver would stop. They did. It was a trucker, an older man with a kind face, who didn't ask too many questions when I begged for a ride. He just nodded and told me to get in. As we drove away, I looked back one last time. The road was empty. No figures. No pounding footsteps. Just the dark, silent woods. I still take night drives sometimes, but I never ever take the back roads anymore. It took weeks before I could even bring myself to talk about that night. And when I did, no one believed me. Not really. A few friends humored me with nervous laughter, chalking it up to stress or lack of sleep. Your imagination got the better of you, they'd say. But I knew what I saw, what I heard, that pounding. For a while, I tried to convince myself it was over, that whatever I'd encountered was tied to that house and those woods. But things didn't go back to normal. Not entirely. It started small. Shadows where they shouldn't be. Fleeting movements in my peripheral vision. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to the faint sound of tapping on my bedroom window, only to find nothing there. Just the wind, I told myself. Just my nerves. But then, the phone calls started. At first, it was just static, long hissing silence that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Then, faint whispers would bleed through, too muffled to understand. I stopped answering unknown numbers altogether, but it didn't matter. The calls kept coming, every night at 3:13 a.m. The worst part? They weren't always from an unknown number. Sometimes, the caller ID would display my own number. I went to the police, of course, but they dismissed it as a prank. Probably someone spoofing your number, they said, as if that explanation would make me feel better. It didn't. The next time the call came, I answered. "Who is this?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "What do you want?" The whispering stopped. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, a single word crackled through the static. "Run." The call ended, and the lights in my apartment flickered. That was when I knew I couldn't stay there anymore. I packed a bag and left that night, crashing on a friend's couch. But wherever I went, the whispers followed. It wasn't until the night of the blackout that I realized it wasn't just me. I was driving home from work, cutting through the city when everything went dark. Streetlights, traffic signals, every building, all plunged into an eerie, oppressive blackness. My car sputtered and died in the middle of the street, joining the dozens of other stranded vehicles. The city was silent, save for the distant hum of confused voices and the occasional blare of a car horn. Then I heard it. The pounding. It was faint at first, barely audible over the chaos, but it grew louder, closer. I wasn't the only one who noticed. People were stepping out of their cars, looking around nervously. Some called out, asking if anyone else could hear it. Others just stared into the darkness, their faces pale and drawn. And then we saw them. At first, they looked like shadows, moving too quickly to be natural. But as they drew closer, the streetlights flickered back to life, illuminating them in brief, stuttering flashes. It was them. The figures from the woods, their twisted limbs and too wide grins unmistakable. They were everywhere, crawling down alleyways, emerging from subway grates, pouring out of abandoned buildings. Some moved on all fours, their limbs contorted in ways that shouldn't have been possible. Others walked upright, their heads cocked at unnatural angles. Panic erupted. People screamed, running in all directions, but there was nowhere to go. The figures were faster than us, weaving through the chaos with terrifying precision. They didn't make a sound as they moved. No growls, no footsteps, just that horrible, relentless pounding. I ran, abandoning my car and weaving through the maze of bodies and shadows. The pounding was deafening now, drowning out everything else. I could feel them closing in, their cold, clawed hands brushing against me as I stumbled through the darkened streets. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The pounding, the screaming, the chaos, all gone, replaced by an eerie, unnatural stillness. I found myself standing in the middle of an empty street, surrounded by the wreckage of abandoned cars and shattered glass. There was no sign of the figures, no sign of anyone, except for the eyes. Dozens of them glinting in the darkness, watching me from the shadows, waiting. I didn't wait to see what they'd do next. I ran, not stopping until I was miles away, gasping for breath, in the safety of a crowded diner that had somehow been spared from the chaos. No one believed me when I told them what happened. By the next morning, the city was back to normal. No reports of power outages, no mention of the strange figures on the news. It was like it had never happened. But I know it did, because sometimes late at night, I still hear the pounding, and I know they're out there, watching, waiting. And I don't think they're done with me yet. I stopped driving at night altogether. In fact, I stopped going out after dark entirely. I changed my routine, my job, even my address. Anything to feel like I could put some distance between me and them. But no matter what I did, that oppressive feeling of being watched followed me everywhere. Weeks turned into months, and the memories of that night began to fade, buried under the monotony of survival. But they never disappeared completely. Every creak of a floorboard, every flicker of a streetlight, it all brought me back to the pounding, to those eyes in the dark. I convinced myself I was safe during the day, that as long as the sun was up, they couldn't reach me. But deep down, I knew better. The final straw came on a bright, cloudless afternoon. I was at a coffee shop downtown, sitting by the window and nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee, when I saw it. Across the street, standing in the shadow of an alleyway, was a figure. Tall, motionless, its head cocked at that familiar, unnatural angle. Even from a distance, I could feel its gaze burning into me. I froze, the cup trembling in my hands as I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light, a random passerby. But then it moved, just a small tilt of the head, almost like a nod, and I knew. I grabbed my bag and left without a word, my heart hammering in my chest as I walked as quickly as I could without breaking into a run. I didn't look back, didn't let myself see if it was following me. I just needed to get home. When I arrived, the house felt wrong. The air was heavy, suffocating, like the walls were pressing in on me. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but I ignored it. I locked the door behind me, pulled all the curtains shut, and sat in the middle of the living room, clutching the fireplace poker like it could save me. The sun set, casting long shadows across the room, and then the power went out. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint hum of the wind outside. And then it started. The pounding. It came from all directions, above, below, outside the windows. It was louder than it had ever been, shaking the walls and rattling the furniture. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. It wasn't just a sound anymore. I could feel it in my chest, in my bones. And then the lights came back on. Standing in the middle of the room, no more than 5 feet away, was one of them. Its limbs were too long, its smile too wide, and its eyes, those horrible glinting eyes, were locked onto mine. I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was fear or desperation or sheer madness, but I swung the poker with everything I had, the metal connecting with a sickening crunch. The figure crumpled to the floor, its body twitching in unnatural spasms. And then it vanished. One moment, it was there, a broken heap on the floor. The next, it was gone, leaving nothing behind but a faint, acrid smell that made my stomach turn. The pounding stopped. I didn't sleep that night, or the night after that. I kept waiting for it to return, for the others to come for me. But they never did. It's been years now, and I haven't seen or heard them since. I moved across the country, changed my name, started over completely. On the surface, my life is normal, but the scars of that night run deep. Sometimes, I catch myself looking over my shoulder or jumping at the sound of a distant knock. And at night, I double-check every lock, close every curtain, and sit in the dark, listening for the faintest hint of pounding, because I know they're still out there, and I don't think they ever really let me go.